Hello, it's Monday afternoon and it's coffee time with Joe Lamb and Michael Stone. I am not sure that Michael's going to join us this afternoon, and I'm actually enjoying tea instead of iced tea, instead of coffee. So bear with us. Appreciated our conversation last week, appreciated everybody listening, and we talked about a theme last week, which we're going to talk about more today, about the concept of how do we want to be in the world? How do we want to show up in the world? What is it that we want to be experiencing? And I kind of made the challenge for all of us to get out there and participate in the world and give something to someone kind of unexpectedly. And today I heard an absolutely great story. A friend of mine, Dr. Walter Savage, Skip Savage, cardiologist outside San Francisco, shared something on Facebook, a link to this video. And I am going to actually play this video for you all now. And I hope you can hear it.
People think we're more divided as a country now than we've been in a long time. I know it can seem that way, but when I was a little kid in 1969, the Vietnam War was tearing the country apart. And they'd shot John F. Kennedy, and they'd shot Bobby Kennedy, they'd shot Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And there was the Manson family and the Zodiac killer, and it just felt like the whole country had lost its mind. My father had grown up in the Depression, while his faith in humanity was just at a low ebb. And the two of us that June were driving from LA to Oakland in an old 1960 Oldsmobile, and a water pump blew out south of Bakersfield. And so this was long before cell phones, so we were going to have to hoof it like 9 or 10 miles into town, when this young cowboy pulls up in a flatbed and offers to tow us in. And all my dad had on for money was this old Chevron gas card, so he kept telling this young fellow, I can't pay you. And the young cowboy's looking at him like, yeah, I wasn't going to charge you. So he rolls us into town, and this is a Sunday, so nothing's open. So he has to go get his mechanic friend to open up his garage, and my dad says, hey, listen, I don't have any money. And the mechanic says, we'll work something out. And then they all realize they don't have the actual parts, so now they got to go roust out the local auto parts store owner, and they bring him down. And my father's like, okay, we need to talk about how this is all going to get settled, because he just couldn't imagine anybody being this trusting about the money. So the cowboy says, look, to make it feel better, I got a bunch of watermelons I need to get loaded onto my flatbed, and it's pretty hot work. And if you help me out, I'll pay for the part. So next thing you know, we're all unloading watermelons from inside a rail car. That's about 140 degrees. And 90 minutes later, we are soaked in sweat. And up rolls the car, just running like a top. And my dad says, I really don't know how to thank you, fellas, for this good turn. And we're turning to go, and the mechanic gets this look on his face and says, whoa, where do you think you're going? And you could see on my father's face just all the fear and distrust come to the surface. He's stiffened like a leopard. And the mechanic says, no. My wife's going to make us all Sunday dinner, and you and the boy can get a shower, a clean shirt, and it'll make the drive easier for all of us. So we sat down for a dinner of fried chicken from the chicken right over there, and corn on the cob from the corn right over there. Man, I got to tell you, we'll never have a meal that good ever again. And my dad didn't say maybe 3 words the whole drive, but when we got home, I got into bed. I was just about to turn off the light, and he stops in the doorway and he says to me, no matter what you see in the movies or on TV or you read in the papers, you listen to me. That's how people really are. And about a month later, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. So, keep the faith.
So that was Neil Ford. He's a marketing officer at a company called Within. And a remarkable story. And I think it's one that really speaks to our time. You can find that video on YouTube if you want to share it with other people. And I put his name down there in the notes section on this talk. But, you know, I think we live in remarkable times. And but we don't think of them as wonderful times. You know, I had an interesting conversation with my son over the last couple of days, and had an interesting conversation with Courtney Suter, who taught with us at Feathered Pipe Ranch, you know, for the Consilience Partnership Retreat back in early July. And we were talking about the challenges that are facing young people today, and the challenges that faced young people in the late 60s. And they're both groups of kids shared a huge distrust for the government. As Neil Ford just pointed out, in 1969, we were in the middle of a big war. Young people were being drafted. We've just ended, or are in the process of ending, our involvement in the war in Afghanistan. So those are kind of shared experiences. We had all the racial unrest of the 1960s, and we're beginning to see some light perhaps at the end of the tunnel. And, you know, now unfortunately it's 2020, over 50 years later, and we're looking at the fact that maybe the light at the end of the tunnel was actually the headlight on an oncoming vehicle or a train. And things really haven't been addressed. And there's still a lot of pain and suffering and opportunity to relate to each other differently. The difference that I see, and, you know, I was young. I was young in 1969. I was 10 years old when Neil Ford was talking about, you know, moving the watermelons. So this is more of my impression of the time than now. But, you know, the music expressed a hope, not a dissatisfaction, but a hope. I can remember singing songs by the Young Bloods and by Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul and Mary in church, even songs by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, you know, like Teach Your Children by Graham Nash. You know, it was an optimistic time. And I think what differentiates that time from this time is that at that point in time, there were a lot of leaders who had a vision, who were optimistic about the future, and we had a different level of trust. Though it seemed like the establishment back then was out of touch, they didn't necessarily seem perhaps as pervasively evil as we've come to call people on either side of the divide, the cultural divide that we have now. You know, as the early 60s moved around, you know, we had the situation in which, you know, we had the Beat Generation turning into the Hippie Generation and kind of the optimism. We had the introduction of Buddhism and Eastern philosophies into the United States. We had revisioning even of what the Judeo-Christian model was. You know, the Catholic Church had undergone Vatican II and adopted many more liberal policies and actually taken the Mass from Latin to English. So, you know, in other countries to the vernacular, so that it could be more of a personal experience. We had leaders like John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy. We had leaders like, you know, Martin Luther King. You know, we had people envisioning a different world. And indeed, the stories that you hear about Haight-Ashbury leading up to the Summer of Love and kind of the political changes that were beginning to be taking place, which unfortunately kind of got lost a little bit. That optimism got washed away in the harsh realities of, all the people descending upon Haight-Ashbury, all of, the generation who weren't looking for change, who weren't looking for a new way of making the world, but were more short-term invested in, I guess drug, sex, and rock and roll, and and maybe in a nicer way of putting it, peace, love, and drugs, but somewhere along the way we lost a little something, and the last few years have been particularly dramatic. And last week, we talked about how to make a difference, how to view the world a little differently, and going out and doing something. And I put it in the chat already, but if anyone did something this past week that was a little bit of a stretch, that was a way of thanking the universe non-specifically, I'd love to hear about it. It's funny because there's always a person somewhere you can thank. When I get upgraded, because I'm a frequent flyer on Alaska, and I end up in first class, I know it was a computer. I know it was an algorithm. I know that it was some policy decision made by somebody that just happened to put me at the top of the list. But they're flight attendants right there on the plane. They're, pilots right there on the plane. When I get upgraded, and a lot of times now, even when I haven't been upgraded, I bring a bag of chocolates on board and give them to the flight attendant right as I move towards my seat, in order to share and to brighten up their day and to say thank you, because I can't really thank a computer, but I can give the energy back to the world a little bit. And I think that that's the opportunity. This past week, I reached out to reconnect with a friend who sometimes seems to be more work than almost friendship is worth. But friendship doesn't just mean getting something, it means giving something. So that was something that I did this past week. And I'd really love to see in the chat some of the things you've done this past week. And tonight I'm going to the free clinic over in Tacoma. It's called the Neighborhood Clinic. It's at 13th in Yakima, in one of the old buildings at St. Leo's School there. And it's a volunteer opportunity. It's fully volunteered staff, practitioners and nurses and pharmacists and administrators and just simple volunteers who want to provide an opportunity for people to get health care. So Neighborhood Clinic, if you're looking for an opportunity to get involved in volunteer, there are lots of pre-med students who volunteer, there are medical students who volunteer, nursing students, there's social workers who are doing their internship, there's social workers who are volunteering, there's a nutritionist who recently has started. It is a community of people trying to contribute to other people's health. I think what we have to do going forward is be really intentional. Some of the work that we've been doing with the Consilience Partnership has been a discussion about how to generate health and well-being, how to generate for ourselves optimal wellness. And when you think about it, that's sort of 4P medicine, that it's participatory. So you're involved. It's patient-centered. You actually are more important than the disease that you have. As William Osler said, it's more important to know you than the disease that you have. His exact words was, it's more important to know the patient who has the disease than the disease that the patient has. Going a little bit further, beyond that is, as we gain this understanding, that it should be able to be predictive, that we should be able to find out early enough what the trend is. And then it should be, because we can be predictive and can see the possible direction that the course is going to take, we should be able to make it preventative. That's what P4 medicine is. And that is what, the opportunity is in terms of moving forward and getting very direct about where we want to go. But, as we create that sort of medicine, as we invite people to be part of that medicine, and we invite them to make lifestyle changes, to create wellness, to kind of support them through diseases and create new opportunities, behavioral change is hard if we don't know what's important, meaningful, and valuable. And when we go inward and we do a dive inward to see what's important, meaningful, and valuable, sometimes we see within us that there's something special, that that kind of inherent spirit, which we're kind of endowed with, that there is something unique. Something took place in human beings, according to Yuval Harari, 70,000 years ago, when something happened that changed kind of the evolution for human beings, whether it was, getting language, whether it was beginning to use tools, whether it was some other component, whether it was the mirror neurons in the frontal lobes, allowing us to understand what someone else felt and mirror it back to them, and kind of the development of empathy. Whatever it was that happened then, we became connected with each other. And in that connection deep within us, when we find what's important in us, we recognize that that important piece is there in someone else too. We share that common uniqueness, whether it's a gift, from God in the Judeo-Christian model, whether it's the uniqueness of the kind of Buddhist model of what we seek when we seek the quiet and the stillness, whether it's the Force from Star Wars, if you're, celebrate May 4th, may the Force be with you, may the Fourth be with you. Whatever it may be, whatever your belief system is, when we recognize that there's something special in us, we recognize that there's something special in someone else. And then if we're grateful for that, if we're grateful for the opportunities that we have, we can be grateful and reflect it to people around us by being of service. Not everybody deserves our love and affection based upon their behaviors, but they deserve it because of that spark within them. Marianne Williamson, kind of building upon the work of Course of Miracles in a number of her books, and I think, now I'm going to forget the title of the book that I'm particularly interested in, but it's got a title like Love Never. Well, I'm blanking on the title by Marianne Williamson, and it looks like she's kicking off a new program called Transform, which I saw on her website. But the point being that we don't have to forget people's bad behaviors And we don't necessarily have to forgive their bad behaviors, but what we attempt to do is forgive the person. And in doing that, it frees us from holding on to the pain or the anger or the hostility, and allows us to be in a different place, allows us to move through our own trauma. Um, um, I think that the opportunity becomes one for us to get out there and do something. But in creating these filters of figuring out what's important and meaningful and valuable, we also have to create some filters around what we believe, what is important to us, where are we going to go. I just listened to a very informative, great course program on Audible entitled Heroes and Legends, the most influential characters of literature. And it was by Professor Thomas Shippey. And it was great because it talked about representative people throughout the course of history and what it meant to be a hero or what it meant to be influential, and how cultural valuation at the time that stories were written or at the later have made some stories have lasting consequences and other stories become forgotten. But in that, one of the things that becomes really important is we've got to follow people. We've got to follow people who stand for something. We've got to follow people who can lead, and they lead with, I guess it was Simon Sinek's book, they lead with understanding a why. They do it for a purpose. They do it to make the world a better place. But, as you talk about these heroes, one of the heroes in discussed was William Smith and what he went through in 1984, George Orwell's book. And clearly there was a lot about William Smith that wasn't heroic, but he fought the fight for a while. And that is what each of us can do. We may not make huge steps forward, but we can fight the fight. And part of that fight is recognizing that though, we had brushes with a totalitarian government just recently, and though we had brushes with insurrection, and though we have riots like we had this weekend in Portland, where the two sides were actually firing upon each other, though we had all of that, the biggest danger for us is probably not represented by a totalitarian government, despite 1984 or Animal Farm, but Aldous Huxley's view of the world in the Brave New World, where we're distracted, where our attention is grabbed by devices, by information, by entertainment, by all of those pieces. All of that becomes this distraction that keeps us from, paying attention. I don't know how many of you all ever saw the play by Henrik Ibsen or read it, called An Enemy of the People. But the plot was a town with a financial interest discovering a danger in the water. And once they discovered danger in the water, and they were warned by an expert about that danger in the water, they were reluctant to close the waters for financial reasons. And eventually, in Ibsen's play, which was the story of a doctor in the late 1800s trying to expound about germ theory and the fact that the baths were contaminated with germs that were making people sick, The upshot of it was that they ran the unfortunate doctor out of town. Well, we know that story was retold in the 1970s as the movie Jaws, but now it was a shark in the water, and the expert or the person who wasn't willing to accept that the waters were safe was the town sheriff, and he did his best to make the waters safe once again. And in the 1970 retelling, the sheriff triumphs, though the research scientist dies, though the boat captain dies, the sheriff triumphs, and he brings home as a trophy the big white shark. And, you know, stories evolve, we look at them differently, and we have different filters. And that's the filter that we need to bring, because what the point was of Ibsen's play, and it was made a little bit clearer in Ibsen's play than it is in the movie Jaws, the point is there is always a learned minority who is actually leading in a certain field and are actually the ones whose knowledge leads them to be the experts. But the experts aren't always appreciated. And that's really the big challenge that we have now with YouTube and Facebook Lives like this one and others. We have to pick who we're going to listen to, and we have to pick who we're going to trust, because while there is always a minority that knows the most about a situation and actually sees the path to a solution, they don't know, we don't know how to select that minority, which minority is right. And, you know, it's easy in some places, like, you know, in picking out the right nutritional supplement, you want to pick a company that's good manufacturing practices certified by one of the national organizations like the Natural Products Alliance or the National Sanitary or the forgetting the other one at the moment, but the two organizations that do it, you know, these are the ones that we trust to say, oh, that company follows good manufacturing practices, and they prove it by being interviewed. And that really is a remarkable way of picking a supplement and knowing which one to pick. But we don't get that. You know, like, we can look to see how many views someone has, and we can kind of say, okay, all of those views, you know, what difference, you know, does that make? Who's watching them? Well, one thing we can do is to see who's commenting and what their comments are like, and are there smart people commenting about what they said. Number two, another way to do it is to look at what sort of education the person has had. You know, for some of the doctors who, you know, just because we're doctors doesn't mean we're scientists and doesn't mean we're virologists. And some of the opinions that have been put out there about vaccines are clearly beyond the bounds of science. But if you look, if you explore, you can find a lot of voices that are speaking from, you know, a leading minority who actually have good intentions. One of the distinctions is when you're listening to someone's opinion, you ask yourself, what are they getting out of it? What do they get by the fact that I'm listening? Are they trying to make the world a better place, or do they have an agenda? So that's one thing you can do. You can assess their education. You can assess comments from their followers. Are there messages of growth and positivity, or does there seem to be a lot of hate among their followers? Are there other experts? When people talk, are they quoting, you know, books that they've read, people who they've seen, who are potential thought leaders, who are scientists, who are worthy politicians, people that we can all feel good about having that expert opinion about. At the end of the day, what are they giving? What part of themselves are they contributing to you? And what are they asking you to do? What is the call? Again, I think it's Simon Sinek and his, books start with why. Why's at the center, and then what we do and how we do it. And the why is important. Do you align with what is going on? So, the message that I would share, and once again, I want to make this a challenge to everybody. I want you to go out and say that you will do something for somebody else. Tom Salt, a doctor in Minnesota, functional medicine leader, put on his website that, that he would be a person to stand up if someone needed someone to listen to. And he asked for people to say that they would too. And I did on Joseph Lamb, MD. I said, hey, I will be there to listen if someone needs to reach out. We all need to create a community of people who care in interconnected fashions. And when we do, we can counteract that angst, that zeitgeist of wars ending and throwing away investments of young people's lives who've worked so hard, creating systems which have disappeared. That's upsetting. What's happened in Haiti, another earthquake after 10 years and, an assassination, the UN Commission on Climate Change, upsetting. We can look at all these things and we can say to ourselves, hey, I'm going to show up and in some little way, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to the neighborhood clinic tonight. What are you going to do tonight? It can be as simple as giving an extra hug to someone. It can be as simple as telling someone you appreciate them for what they did today with you at work. It can be as simple as actually engaging someone in a conversation, who's checking you out at the food store. It can be simply waving to someone who drives the same sort of car that you drive. Get out in the world, show someone that you care, do something, contribute. We can make the world better. And when we do these things, each of us, we become leaders. And though our current leaders seem not yet to understand what they need to do to stand up, by doing these things, we'll call the leaders forward who will get us to where we need to be to make this a better place for our children and our grandchildren. I care. I know you do. Michael had to deal with a medical emergency in his family. He'll be back next week. Prayers for Michael and his family. And thank you, everybody. Happy Monday.